Chapter 17 of Blackfeet Indian Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Blackfeet Indian Stories by George B. Grinnell. Chapter 17. The Rabbit's Medicine. Once, when Old Man was traveling about, he heard some singing that sounded very queer. He had never before heard anything like it, and looked all about to see where it came from. After a time he saw that the cottontail rabbits were singing and making medicine. They had built a fire, and raked out some hot ashes, and they would lie down in these ashes and sing, while one of the others covered them up. They could stay there only for a short time, though, for the ashes were hot. "Little brothers," said Old Man, "here is something wonderful, that you can lie in those hot ashes and coals without burning. I ask you to teach me how to do this." "We will show you how to do it, Old Man," said the rabbits. "You must sing our song, and stay in the ashes only a short time." They taught Old Man their song, and he began to sing and lay down, and they covered him with coals and ashes, and the hot ashes did not burn him. "That is good," he said. "You have strong medicine. Now, so that I may know it all, do you lie down, and let me cover you up." All the rabbits lay down in the ashes, and Old Man covered them up, and then he pulled the whole fire over them. Only one rabbit got out, and Old Man was just about to put her back when she said, "Pity me, my children need me." "It is good," replied Old Man. "You may go, so that there will be more rabbits, but these I will roast and have a feast." He put more wood on the fire, and when the rabbits were cooked he got some red willow brush and put the rabbits on it to cool. The grease from their bodies soaked into the branches, so that even today, if red willow is held over a fire, one may see the grease on the bark. Ever since that time, too, the rabbits have a burnt place on the back, where the one that got away was singed. Old Man sat down by the fire, waiting for the rabbits to get cool, when a coyote came along, limping. He went on 3 legs. "Pity me, Old Man," he said. "You have plenty of cooked rabbits. Give me one of them." "Go away," said Old Man, very cross. "If you are too lazy to catch food, I will not give you any." "But my leg is broken," said the coyote. "I cannot run, I cannot catch anything, and I am starving. Give me half a rabbit." "I don't care what happens to you," said Old Man. "I worked hard to catch and cook these rabbits, and I shall not give any of them away. I'll tell you what I will do, though. I will run a race with you out to that far butte on the prairie, and if you beat me you can have a rabbit." "Good," said the coyote, and they started. Old Man ran very fast, and the coyote limped along behind him, but pretty close, until they got near the butte. Then the coyote turned around and ran back very fast, for he was not lame at all. It took Old Man a long time to get back, and just before he reached the fire, the coyote finished eating the last rabbit and ran away. End of Chapter 17. The Rabbit's Medicine. Read by Kara Schallenberg on March 16th, 2008 in San Diego, California. 18 of Blackfeet Indian Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Blackfeet Indian Stories by George B. Grinnell. Chapter 18. The Lost Elk Meat. Old Man had been a long time without food, and was very hungry. He was trying to think how he could get something to eat, when he saw a band of elk come up on a ridge. He went over to them and spoke to them, and said, "Brothers, I am lonely because I have no one to follow me." "Go ahead, Old Man," said the elk. "We will follow you." Old Man led them about for a long time, and when it was dark he came near a high, steep-cut bank. He ran around to one side where the hill sloped, and then went back right under the steep cliff and called out, "Come on, that is a nice jump, you will laugh." So all the elk jumped off and were killed, except one cow. "They have all jumped but you," said Old Man. "Come on, you will like it." "Take pity on me," said the cow. "I am very heavy, and I am afraid to jump." "Go away then," said Old Man. "Go and live. Then some day there will be plenty of elk again." Old Man built a fire and cooked some of the meat, and then he skinned all the elk and cut up the meat and hung it up to dry. The tongues he hung on a pole. The next day he started off and was gone all day, and at night as he was coming home he was very hungry. He was thinking to himself that he would have some roasted ribs and a tongue and other good things, but when he reached the place the meat was all gone. The wolves had eaten it. "It was lucky I hung up those tongues," said Old Man, "or I should not have had anything to eat." But when he took down the tongues they were all hollow. The mice had eaten out the meat, leaving only the skins. End of chapter 18, The Lost Elk Meat. Read by Kara Schallenberg on March 16, 2008 in San Diego, California. Of Blackfeet Indian Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Blackfeet Indian Stories by George B. Grinnell. Chapter 19, The Rolling Rock. Once, when Old Man was traveling about and felt tired, he sat down on a rock to rest. After he was rested, he started on his way, and because the sun was hot, he threw his robe over the rock and said to it, "Here, I give you my robe, because you are poor and have let me rest on you. Keep it always." He had not gone far when it began to rain, and, meeting a coyote, he said to him, "Little brother, run back to that rock and ask him to lend me his robe. We will cover ourselves with it and keep dry." The coyote ran back to the rock, but presently returned without the robe. "Where is the robe?" asked Old Man. "Why," said the coyote, "the rock said that you had given him the robe and he was going to keep it." This made Old Man angry, and he went back to the rock and snatched the robe off it, saying, "I was only going to borrow this robe until the rain was over, but now that you have acted so mean about it, I will keep it. You don't need a robe anyhow. You have been out in the rain and snow all your life, and it will not hurt you to live so always." When he had said this, he put the robe about his shoulders, and with the coyote he went off into a ravine, and they sat down there. The rain was falling, and they covered themselves with the robe, and were warm and dry. Pretty soon they heard a loud rumbling noise, and Old Man said to the coyote, "Little brother, go up on the hill and see what that noise is." The coyote went off, but presently he came back, running as hard as he could, saying, "Run, run, the big rock is coming." They both started, and ran away as fast as they could. The coyote tried to creep into a badger hole, but it was too small for him, and he stuck fast, and before he could get out, the rock rolled over him and crushed his hips. Old Man was frightened, and as he ran he threw away his robe and everything that he had on, so that he might run faster. The rock was gaining on him all the time. Not far away on the prairie a band of buffalo bulls were feeding, and Old Man cried out to them, saying, "Oh, my brothers, help me, stop that rock." The bulls ran and tried to stop it, butting against it, but it crushed their heads. Some deer and antelope tried to help Old Man, but they too were killed. Other animals came to help him, but could not stop the rock. It was now close to Old Man, so close that it began to hit his heels. He was just going to give up when he saw circling over his head a flock of nighthawks. "Oh, my little brothers," he cried, "help me, I am almost dead." The bull bats flew down one after another against the rock, and every time one of them hit it he chipped off a piece, and at last one hit it fair in the middle and broke it into 2 pieces. Then Old Man was glad. He went to where there was a nest of nighthawks, and pulled their mouths out wide and pinched off their bills, to make them pretty and queer-looking. That is the reason they look so today. End of chapter 19, The Rolling Rock. Read by Kara Schallenberg on March 16, 2008, in San Diego, California.
Chapter 20 of Blackfeet Indian Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lucy LaFaro, New South Wales, Australia. Blackfeet Indian Stories by George B. Grinnell. Chapter 20. Old Man Stories. Bear and Bullberries. Scattered over the prairie in northern Montana, close to the mountains, are many great rocks, boulders which thousands of years ago, when the great ice sheet covered northern North America, were carried from mountains out over the prairie by the ice and left there when it melted. Around most of these great boulders the buffalo used to walk from time to time, rubbing against the rough surface of the rock to scratch themselves, as a cow rubs itself against a post, or as a horse rolls on the ground, for the pleasant feeling that the rubbing of the skin gives it. As the buffalo walked around these boulders, their hoofs loosened the soil, and this loosened soil, the dust, was blown away by the constant winds of summer. So around most of these boulders much of the soil is gone, leaving a deep trench at the bottom of which are stones and gravel too large to be moved by the wind. This story explains how these rocks came to be like that. Once Old Man was crossing a river, and the stream was deep, so that he was carried away by the current, and lost his bow and arrows and other weapons. When he got to the shore, he began to look about for something to use in making a bow and arrows, for he was hungry and wanted to kill some food. He took the first wood he could find and made a bow and arrows and handle for his knife. When he had finished these things, he started on his way. Presently, as he looked over a hill, he saw down below him a bear digging roots. Old Man thought he would have some fun with the bear, and he called out aloud, "He has no tail." Then he dodged back out of sight. The bear looked all about, but saw no one, and again began to dig roots. Then Old Man again peeped over the hill and saw the bear at work, and again called out, "He has no tail." This time the bear looked up more quickly, but Old Man dodged down, and the bear did not see him, and pretty soon went on with his digging. 4 times Old Man did this, calling the bear names, but the 4th time the bear was on the watch and saw Old Man and started after him. Old Man ran away as hard as he could, but the bear followed fast. Presently Old Man tried to shoot the bear with his arrows, but they were made of bad wood and would not fly well, and if they hit the bear they just broke off. All his weapons failed him, and now the bear was close to him. Just in front was a great rock, and when Old Man came to that, he dodged behind it and ran around to the other side, and the bear followed him. They kept running around the rock for a long time, and wore a deep trail about it, and because Old Man could turn more quickly, he kept just ahead of the bear. Old Man kept calling to the animals to help him, but no one came. He was almost out of breath, and the bear was close to him, when Old Man saw lying on the ground a bull's horn. He picked it up and held it on his head and turned around and bellowed loudly. And the bear was frightened and turned around and ran away as hard as he could. Then Old Man leaned up against the rock and breathed hard for a long time. But at last he got his wind back. He said to the rock, "This is the way you rocks shall always be after this, with a big hole all around you." By this time he was pretty tired and thirsty, and he thought he would go down to the river and drink. When he got to the edge of the water, he got down on his knees to drink, and there before him in the water he saw bullberries, great bunches of them. He said to himself, "I will dive in and get those bullberries." And he took off his moccasins and clothing and dived in. But he could not find the bullberries, and presently he came up. He looked into the water again, and again saw the bullberries. He said to himself, "Those bullberries must be very deep down." He went along the shore looking for a heavy stone that would take him down into the deep water where the bullberries were, and when he found one, He tied the stone to his neck and again dived in. This time he sank to the bottom, for the stone carried him down. He felt about with his hands, trying to reach the bullberries, but could feel nothing and began to drown. He tried to get free from the stone, but that was hard to do. Yet at last he broke the string and came to the top of the water. He was almost dead, and it took him a long time to get to the shore, and when he got there he crawled up onto the bank and lay down to rest and get his breath. As he lay there on his back, he saw above him the thick growing bullberries whose reflections he had seen in the water. He said to himself, "And I was almost drowned for these." Then he took a stick and with it began to beat the bullberry bushes. He said to the bushes, "After this, the people shall beat you in this way when they want to gather berries." The Blackfeet women, when gathering bullberries, spread robes under the bushes and beat the branches with sticks, knocking off the berries which fall on the robes. End of chapter 20. Of Blackfeet Indian Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lucy LaFaro, New South Wales, Australia. Blackfeet Indian Stories by George B. Grinnell. Chapter 21. Old Man Stories. The Theft from the Sun. One time when Old Man was on a journey, he came to the Sun's lodge, and went in and sat down, and the Sun asked him to stay with him for a time. Old Man was glad to do so. One day the meat was all gone, and the Sun said, "Well, Old Man, what do you say if we go out and kill some deer?" "I like what you say," said Old Man. "Deer meat is good." The Sun took down a bag that was hanging from a lodge pole, and took from it a handsome pair of leggings embroidered with porcupine quills and pretty feathers. "These are my hunting leggings," said the Sun. "They have great power. When I want to kill deer, all I have to do is to put them on and walk around a patch of brush, and the leggings set it on fire and drive out the deer, so that I can shoot them." "Well, well," exclaimed Old Man, "how wonderful that is!" He began to think, "I wish I had such a pair of leggings as that." And after he had thought about it some more, he made up his mind that he would have those leggings if he had to steal them. They went out to hunt, and when they came to a patch of brush, the Sun set it on fire with his hunting leggings. A number of deer ran out, and each shot one. That night, when they were going to bed, the Sun pulled off his leggings and laid them aside. Old Man saw where he had put them, and in the middle of the night, after everyone was asleep, he took the leggings and went away. He travelled a long time, until he had gone far away and was tired. Then, making a pillow of the leggings, he lay down and slept. After a while he heard someone speaking, and woke up and saw that it was day. Someone was talking to him. The Sun was saying, "Old Man, why are my leggings under your head?" Old Man looked about him and saw that he was in the Sun's lodge. He thought he must have wandered around and got lost and returned there. Again the Sun spoke and asked, "What are you doing with my leggings?" "Oh," replied Old Man, "I could not find anything for a pillow, so I put these leggings under my head." When night came and all had gone to bed again, Old Man stole the leggings and ran off. This time he did not walk at all. He kept running until it was almost morning, and then lay down and slept. When morning came, he found himself still in the Sun's lodge. You see what a fool he was. He did not know that the whole world is the Sun's lodge. He did not know that no matter how far he ran, he could not get out of the Sun's sight. This time the Sun said, "Old man, since you like my leggings so much, I give them to you. Keep them." Then Old Man was glad, and he went away. One day his food was all gone, and he put on the hunting leggings and went out and set fire to a piece of brush. He was just going to kill some deer that were running out when he saw that the fire was getting close to him. He ran away as fast as he could, but the fire gained on him and began to burn his legs. His leggings were all on fire. He came to a river and jumped in and pulled off the leggings as soon as he could. They were burnt to pieces. Perhaps the Sun did this because Old Man tried to steal his leggings. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Blackfeet Indian Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lucy LaFaro, New South Wales, Australia. Blackfeet Indian Stories by George B. Grinnell. Chapter 22. Old Man's Stories, The Smart Woman Chief. Long ago, they tell me, men and women did not know each other. Women were put in one place and men in another. They were not together, they were apart. He who made us made women first. He did not make them very well. That is why they are not so strong as men. The men he made better, so that they were strong. The women were the smartest. They knew the most. They were the first to make piskins, and to know how to tan hides and to make moccasins. At that time men wore moccasins made from the shank of the buffalo's leg, and robes made of wolf skin. This was all their clothing. One day when Old Man was traveling about, he came to a camp of men and stayed there with them for a long time. It was after this that he discovered there were such beings as women. One time, as he was traveling along, he saw two women driving some buffalo over a cliff. When Old Man got near them, the women were very much frightened. They did not know what kind of animal it was that was coming. Too much scared to run away, they lay down to hide. When Old Man came up to them, he thought they were dead, and said, "Here are two women who are dead. It is not good for them to lie out here on the prairie. I must take them to a certain place." He looked them all over to see what had killed them, but could find no wound. He picked up one of the women and carried her along with him in his arms. She was wondering how she could get away. She let her arms swing loose as if she were dead, and at every step Old Man took, the arm swung and hit him in the nose, and pretty soon his nose began to bleed and to hurt. And at length he put the woman down on the ground and went back to get the other woman. But while he was gone, she had run away, and when he came back to get the first one, she was gone too. So he lost them both. This made him angry, and he said to himself, "If these two women will lie there again, I will get both of them." In this way women found out that there were men. One day Old Man stood on a hill and looked over towards the piskun at Women's Falls, where the women had driven a band of buffalo over the cliff, and afterward were cutting up the meat. The chief of the women called him down to the camp and sent word by him to the men, asking if they wanted to get wives. Old Man brought back word that they did, and the chief woman sent a message calling all the men to a feast in her lodge to be married. The woman asked Old Man, "How many chiefs are there in that tribe?" He answered, "There are 4 chiefs, but the real chief of all that tribe you will know when you see him by this: he is finely dressed and wears a robe trimmed and painted red, and carries a lance with a bone head on each end. Old Man wanted to marry the chief of the women, and intended to dress in this way, and that is why he told her that. Old Man had no moccasins. His were all worn out. The women gave him some for himself, and also some to take back to give to the men, and he went back to the men's camp. When he reached it, word went out that he had returned, and all the men said to each other, "He has got back. Old Man has come again." He gave the men the message that the women had sent, and soon the men started for the women's camp to get married. When they came near it, they went up on a bluff and stood there, looking down on the camp. Old Man had dressed himself finely, and had put on a trimmed robe painted red, and in his hand held a lance with a bone head on each end. When the women saw that the men had come, they got ready to go and select their husbands. The chief of the women said, "I am the chief. I will go first and take the man I like. The rest wait here." The woman chief started up the hill to choose the chief of the men for her husband. She had been making dried meat, and her hands, arms, and clothing were covered with blood and grease. She was dirty, and Old Man did not know her. The woman went up to Old Man to choose him, but he turned his back on her and would not go with her. She went back to her camp and told the women that she had been refused because her clothes were dirty. She said, "Now I am going to put on my nice clothes and choose a man. All of you can go up and take men, but let no one take that man with the red robe and the double-headed lance." After she was nicely dressed, the chief woman again went up on the hill. Now Old Man knew who she was, and he kept getting in front of her and trying hard to have her take him, but she would not notice him, and took another man, the one standing next to Old Man. Then the other women began to come, and they kept coming up and choosing men, but no one took Old Man, and at last all the men were taken, and he was left standing there alone. This made him so angry that he wanted to do something, and he went down to the women's piskun and began to break down its walls, so the chief of the women turned him into a pine tree. End of chapter 22. Of Blackfeet Indian Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lucy LaFaro, New South Wales, Australia. Blackfeet Indian Stories by George B. Grinnell. Chapter 23. Old Man's Stories. Bobcat and the Birch Tree. Once Old Man was travelling over the prairie when he saw far off a fire burning, and as he drew near it he saw many prairie dogs sitting in a circle around the fire. There were so many of them that there was no place for anyone to sit down. Old Man stood there behind the circle, and presently he began to cry, and then he said to the prairie dogs, "Let me too sit by that fire." The prairie dogs said, "All right, Old Man, don't cry. Come and sit by the fire." They moved aside so as to make a place for him, and Old Man sat down and looked on at what they were doing. He saw that they were playing a game, and this was the way they did it. They put one prairie dog in the fire and covered him up with the hot ashes, and then, after he had been there a little while, he would say "sk, sk," and they pushed the ashes off him and pulled him out. Old Man said, "Little brothers, teach me how to do that." The prairie dogs told him what to do, and put him in the fire and covered him up with the ashes. And after a little time he said "sk, sk," like a prairie dog, and they pulled him out again. Then he did it to the prairie dogs. At first he put them in one at a time, but there were many of them, and soon he got tired and said, "I will put you all in at once." They said, "Very well, Old Man," and all got in the ashes. But just as Old Man was about to cover them up, one of them, a female, said, "Do not cover me up, for I fear the heat will hurt me." Old Man said, "Very well. If you do not wish to be covered up, you may sit over by the fire and watch the rest." Then he covered over all the others. At length the prairie dog said, "Sk, sk," but Old Man did not sweep off the ashes and pull them out of the fire. He let them stay there and die. The she one that was looking on ran to a hole, and as she went down in it, said, "Sk, sk." Old Man chased her, but he got to the hole too late to catch her. "Oh, well, you can go," he said. "There will be more prairie dogs by and by." When the prairie dogs were roasted, Old Man cut some red willow twigs to place them on, and then sat down and began to eat. He ate until he was full, and then felt sleepy. He said to his nose, "I am going to sleep now. Watch out, and in case any bad thing comes about, wake me up." Then Old Man slept. Pretty soon his nose snored, and Old Man woke up and said, "What is it?" The nose said, "A raven is flying by over there." Old Man said, "That is nothing," and went to sleep again. Soon his nose snored again, and Old Man said, "What is it now?" The nose said, "There is a coyote over there, coming this way." Old Man said, "A coyote is nothing," and again went to sleep. Presently his nose snored again, but Old Man did not wake up. Again it snored and called out, "Wake up! A bobcat is coming." Old Man paid no attention. He slept on. The bobcat crept up to the fire and ate all the roasted prairie dogs, and then went off and lay down on the flat rock and went to sleep. All this time the nose kept trying to awaken Old Man, and at last he awoke, and the nose said, "A bobcat is over there on that flat rock. He has eaten all your food." Then Old Man was so angry that he called out loud. The tracks of the bobcat were all greasy from the food it had been eating, and Old Man followed these tracks. He went softly over to where the bobcat was sleeping and seized it before it could wake up to bite or scratch him. The bobcat cried out, "Wait! Let me speak a word or two," but Old Man would not listen. "I will teach you to steal my food," he said. He pulled off the lynx's tail, pounded his head against the rock so as to make his face flat, pulled him out long so as to make him small-bellied, and then threw him into the brush. As he went sneaking away, Old Man said, "There, that is the way you bobcats shall always be. It is for this reason that the lynxes today look like that." Old Man went to the fire and looked at the red willow sticks where the roasted prairie dogs had been, and when he saw them he thought how his food was all gone. It made him angry at his nose. He said, "You fool! Why did you not wake me?" He took the willow sticks and thrust them in the coals, and when they had caught fire, he burnt his nose. This hurt, and he ran up on a hill and held his nose to the wind, and called to the wind to blow hard and cool him. A hard wind came, so hard that it blew him off the hill and away down to Birch Creek. As he was flying along, he caught at the weeds and brush to stop himself, but nothing was strong enough to hold him. At last he grasped a birch tree. He held fast, and it did not give way. Although the wind whipped him about this way and that, and tumbled him up and down, the tree held him. He kept calling to the wind to blow more softly, and at last it listened to him and went down. Then he said, "This is a beautiful tree. It has saved me from being blown away and knocked all to pieces. I will make it pretty, and it shall always be like that." So he gashed the bark across with his stone knife, as you see the marks today. End of chapter 23. Of Blackfeet Indian Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lucy LaFaro, New South Wales, Australia. Blackfeet Indian Stories by George B. Grinnell. Chapter 24. Old Man's Stories, The Red-Eyed Duck. Once, long ago, Old Man was travelling north along a river. He carried a great pack on his back. After a time he came to a place where the river spread out and the water was quiet, and here many ducks were swimming about. Old Man did not look at the ducks, and kept travelling along, but presently some of the ducks saw him and looked at him and said to each other, "Who is that going along there with a pack on his back?" One duck said to the others, "That must be Old Man." The duck that knew him called out, saying, "Hi, Old Man, where are you going?" "I am going on farther," replied Old Man. "I have been sent for." "What have you got in your pack?" said the duck. "Those are my songs," answered Old Man. "Some people have asked me to come and sing for them." "Stop a while and sing for us," said the duck, "and we can have a dance." "No," said Old Man, "I am in a hurry. I cannot stop now." The duck kept persuading him to stop, and when it had asked him the fourth time, Old Man stopped and said to the ducks, "Well, I will stop for a little while and sing for you, and you can dance." So the ducks all came out on the bank and stood in a circle, and Old Man began to sing. He sang one song, and then he said, "Now, this next song is a medicine dance, and while you dance you must keep your eyes shut. No one must look. If anyone opens his eyes and looks, his eyes will turn red." The ducks closed their eyes, and Old Man began to sing, and they danced around. But Old Man took a stick, and every time one of them passed him, he knocked it on the head and threw it into a circle. Presently one of the littlest ducks, while dancing, could not feel any one on either side of him, and he opened his eyes and looked, and saw what Old Man was doing. He cried out to the rest, "Run, run! Old Man is killing us!" and all the other ducks flew away. But ever since that time that little duck's eyes have been red. It is the horned grebe. Old Man took the ducks and went off a little way and built a fire and hung some of the ducks up in front of it to roast, and after the fire was burning well, he swept away the ashes and buried some of the ducks in the ground, and again swept back the fire over them. Then he lay down to wait for the birds to cook, and while they were cooking he fell asleep. While he slept, a coyote came sneaking along and saw Old Man sleeping there, and the ducks roasting by the fire. Very quietly he crept up to the fire and took the ducks one by one and ate them. Not one was left. Pretty soon he found those that were roasting under the fire, and dug them out, and opening them, ate the meat from the inside of the skin, and filled each one with ashes, and buried them all again. Then he went away. Pretty soon Old Man woke up and saw that his ducks were gone, and when he saw the tracks about the fire, he knew that the coyote had taken them. "It was lucky," said Old Man, "that I put some of those to roast under the fire." He dug them up from under the ashes, but when he took a big bite from one, his mouth and face were full of ashes. End of chapter 24. 25 of Blackfeet Indian Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lucy LaFaro, New South Wales, Australia. Blackfeet Indian Stories by George B. Grinnell. Chapter 25. Old Man's Stories, The Ancient Blackfeet. Long, long ago, before our fathers or grandfathers were born, before the white people knew anything about the western half of North America, the Indians who told these stories lived on the western plains. To the west of their home rose high mountains, black with pine trees on their lower slopes and capped with snow, but their tents were pitched on the rolling prairie. For a little while in spring this prairie was green and dotted with flowers, but for most of the year it stretched away brown and bare, north, east, and south, farther than one could see. On these plains were many kinds of wild animals. Sometimes the prairie was crowded with herds of black buffalo running in fear, or again the herds, unfrightened, fed scattered out, so that the hills far and near were dotted with their dark forms. Among the buffalo were yellow and white antelope, many of them, graceful and swift of foot. Feeding on the high prairie or going down into the wooded river valleys to drink were herds of elk, while the willow thickets, the brushy ravines, and the lower timbered foothills sheltered deer. The naked badlands, the rocky slopes of the mountains, and the tall buttes that often rise above the level prairie were the refuge of the mountain sheep, which in those days, like all the other grass-eaters of the region, grazed on the prairie and sought the more broken, higher country only when alarmed or when they wished to rest. These were the animals which the Blackfeet killed for food before the white men came, and of these the buffalo was the chief. Buffalo, more than any animals, could be captured in numbers, and the Blackfeet, like the other Indians of the plains, had devised a method for taking them, so that when the buffalo were near, the Blackfeet never suffered from hunger. Yet sometimes it happened that the buffalo went away, and that the lonely, far-traveling scouts sent out by the tribe could not find them. Then the people had to turn to the smaller animals, the elk, deer, antelope, and wild sheep. In those old days, before they had horses, they did not make long marches when they moved. Their only domestic animal was the dog, which was used chiefly as a beast of burden, either carrying loads on its back or hauling the travois formed by two long sticks crossing above the shoulders and dragging on the ground behind. Behind the dog these two sticks were united by a little platform, on which was lashed some small burden, sometimes a little baby. In those days, when the people moved from one place to another, all who were large enough to walk and strong enough to carry a burden on the shoulders were laden. Usually, men, women, and children alike bore loads suited to their strength. Yet sometimes the men carried no loads at all, for if journeying through a country where they feared that some enemy might attack them, the men must be ready to fight and to defend their wives and children. A man cannot fight well if he is carrying a burden. He cannot use his arms readily, nor run about lightly, forward to attack, backward in retreat. If he is not free to fight well, his family will be in danger. White men who have seen Indians journeying in this way, and who have not understood why some women carried heavy loads and the men carried nothing, have said that Indian men were idle and lazy, and forced their women to do all the work. Those who wrote those things were mistaken in what they said. They did not understand what they saw. The truth is that these men were prepared for danger of attacks by enemies, and were ready to do their best to save their families from harm. Carrying on their backs all their property, except the little which the dogs might pack, it is evident that the Indians in those days could not make long journeys. In those days they had no buckets of wood or tin in which to carry water. Instead, they used a vessel like a bag or sack, made from the soft membrane of one of the stomachs of the buffalo. This, after it had been cleansed and all the openings from it save one had been tied up, the women filled at the stream with a spoon made of buffalo horn, or with a larger ladle of the horn of the wild sheep. Because this water skin was soft and flexible, it could not stand on the ground, and they hung it up sometimes on the limb of a tree, more often on one of the poles of the lodge, or sometimes on a tripod, 3 sticks coming together at the top and standing spread out at the ground. Most of the meat cooked for the family was roasted, yet much of it was boiled, sometimes in a bowl of stone, sometimes in a kettle made of a fresh hide or of the paunch of the buffalo. Sometimes these skin or paunch kettles were supported at the sides by stakes stuck in the ground, and sometimes a hole dug in the ground was lined with the hide, which was so arranged as to be watertight. They were not, as may be imagined, put over a fire, but when filled with cold water, this water was heated in quite another way. Near by a fire was built, in which were thrown large stones, and on top of the stones more wood was piled, so that after a time, when the wood had burnt down, the stones were very hot, sometimes red hot. With 2 rather short-handled forked sticks, the women took from the fire one of the hot stones, and put it in the water in the hide kettle, and as it cooled, took it out and put in another hot stone. Thus the water was soon heated and boiled and cooked whatever was in the kettle. To be sure, there were some ashes and a little dirt in the soup, but that was not regarded as important. This was long before the Indians knew of matches, or even of flint and steel. In those days to make a fire was not easy, and it took a long time. By his knees or feet a man held in position on the ground a piece of soft dry wood in which 2 or 3 little hollows had been dug out, and taking another slender stick of hard wood, and pressing the point in one of the little hollows in the stick of soft wood, he twirled the stick rapidly between the palms of his hands, so fast and so long that presently the dust ground from the softer stick, falling to one side in a little pile, began to smoke, and at last a faint spark was seen at the top of the pile, which began to glow, and spreading, became constantly larger. He, or his companion, for often 2 men twirled the stick, one relieving the other, caught this spark in a bit of tinder, perhaps some dry punk or a little fine grass, and by blowing coaxed it into flame, and there was the fire. This fire-making was hard work, and the people tried to escape this work by keeping a spark of fire always alive. To do this, men sometimes carried, by a thong slung over the shoulder, the hollow tip of a buffalo horn, the opening of which was closed by a wooden plug. When going on a journey, the man lighted a piece of punk, and placing it in this horn, plugged up the open end so that no air could get into the horn. There the punk smouldered for a long time, and neither went out nor was wholly consumed. Once in a while during the day the man looked at this punk, and if he saw that it was almost consumed, he lighted another piece and put it in the horn and replaced the plug. So at night when he reached camp the fire was still in his horn, and he could readily kindle a blaze, and from this blaze other fires were kindled. Often, if the camp was large, the first young man who reached it gathered wood and perhaps kindled 4 fires, and after the women had reached the camp, unpacked their dogs, and put up their lodges, each woman would go to one of these fires to get a brand or some coals with which to start her own lodge fire. In warm weather men and boys wore little clothing. They went almost naked, yet in cold weather each man or woman was most of the time wrapped in a warm robe of tanned buffalo skin. Even the little children wore robes. The smallest ones, those taken from the little buffalo calves. All their clothing, like their beds and their homes, was made of the skins of animals. Shirts, women's dresses, leggings, and moccasins were made from the tanned skins of buffalo, deer, antelope, and mountain sheep. Often the moccasins were made from the smoked skin cut from the top of an old lodge, for this skin had been smoked so much that it never dried hard and stiff after it had been wet. The moccasins had a stiff sole of buffalo rawhide, and in the bottom of this sole were cut 1 or 2 holes in order that the water might run out if a man had to wade through a stream. The homes of these Indians were lodges, tents made of tanned buffalo skin supported on a cone of long, straight, slender poles. At the top where the poles crossed was an opening for the smoke from the fire built in the center of the circular lodge floor, while about the fire and close under the lodge covering were the beds where the people slept or ate during the day. These homes were warm and comfortable. The border of the lodge covering did not come down quite to the ground, but inside the lodge poles and tied to them was a long white strip of tanned buffalo skin 4 or 5 feet high, and long enough to reach around the inside of the lodge, almost from one side of the door to the other. This strip of tanned skin, made up of several pieces, was so wide that one edge rested on the floor, and reached inward under the beds and seats. Through the open space between the lodge covering and the lodge lining, fresh air kept passing into the lodge close to the ground and up over the lining and down toward the center of the lodge, and so furnished draught for the fire. The lodge lining kept this cold air from blowing directly on the occupants of the lodge who sat around the fire. Often the lodge lining was finely painted with pictures of animals, people, and figures of mysterious beings of which one might not speak. The seats and beds in this home were covered with soft tanned buffalo robes, and at the head and foot of each bed was an inclined backrest of straight willow twigs strung together on long lines of sinew and supported in an inclined position by a tripod. Buffalo robes often hung over these backrests. In the spaces between the backrests, which, though they came together at the top, were separated at the ground, were kept many of the possessions of the family: the pipe, sacks of tobacco, of paint, possible sacks, parfleches of clothing or food, and many smaller articles. The outside of the lodge was often painted with mysterious figures, which the lodge owner believed to have power to bring good luck to him and to his family. Sometimes these figures represented animals, buffalo, deer, and elk, or rocks, mountains, trees, or the puffballs that grow on the prairie. Sometimes a procession of ravens, marching one after the other, was painted around the circumference of the lodge. The painting might show the tracks of animals, or a number of water animals, apparently chasing each other around the lodge. On either side of the smoke hole at the top were 2 flaps, or wings, each one supported by a single pole. These were to regulate the draught of the fire in case of a change of wind, and the poles were moved from side to side, changing as the direction of the wind changed. On such wings were often painted groups of white disks, which represented some group of stars. At the back of the lodge, high up, just below the place where the lodge poles cross, was often a large round disk representing the sun, and above that a cross, which was the sign of the butterfly, the power that they believe brings sleep. From the ends of the wings, or tied to the tips of the poles which supported them, hung buffalo tails, and sometimes, running down from one of these poles to the ground near the door, was a string of the sheaths of buffalo hooflets, which rattled as it swung to and fro in the breeze. Their arms were the bow and arrow, and short spear or lance, with a head of sharpened stone or bone, stone hammers with wooden handles, and knives made of bone or stone, and, if of stone, lashed by rawhide or sinew to a split wooden handle. The hammers were of 2 sorts, one quite heavy, almost like a sledge-hammer or maul, and with a short handle, the other much lighter and with a longer, more limber handle. This last was used by men in war as a mace or war club, while the heavier hammer was used by women as an axe to break up fallen trees for firewood, as a hammer to drive tent pins into the ground, to kill disabled animals, or to break up heavy bones for the marrow they contained. These mauls and hammers were usually made by choosing an oval stone and pecking a groove about its shortest diameter. The handles were made by green sticks fitted as closely as possible into the groove, brought together and lashed in position by sinew, the whole being then covered with wet rawhide tightly fitted and sewed. As the rawhide dried, it shrunk and strongly bound together the parts of the weapon. The Blackfeet bow was about 4 feet long. Its string was of twisted sinew, and it was backed with sinew. This gave the bow great power, so that the arrow went with much force. The arrows were straight shoots of the service berry or cherry, and the manufacture of arrows was the chief employment of many of the men of middle life. Each arrow by the same maker was precisely like every other arrow he made. Each arrow maker tried hard to make good arrows. It was a fine thing to be known as a maker of good arrows. The shoots for the arrow shafts were brought into the lodge, peeled, smoothed roughly, tied up in bundles, and hung up to dry. After they were dried, the bundles were taken down, and each shaft was smoothed and reduced to a proper thickness by the use of a grooved piece of sandstone, which acted on the arrow like sandpaper. After they were of the right thickness, they were straightened by bending with the hands, and sometimes with the teeth, and were then passed through a circular hole drilled in a rib, or in a mountain sheep's horn, which acted in part as a gauge of the size and also as a smoother, for if in passing through the hole the arrow fitted tightly, the shaft received a good polish. The 3 grooves which always were found in the Blackfeet arrows were made by pushing the shaft through the round hole drilled in a rib, which, however, had 1 or more projections left on the inside. These projections pressed into the soft wood and made the grooves, which were in every arrow. The feathers were 3 in number. They were put on with a glue made by boiling scraps of dried rawhide, and were held in place by wrappings of sinew. The heads of the arrows were made of stone or bone or horn. The flint points were often highly worked and very beautiful, being broken from larger flints by sharp blows of a stone hammer, and after they had been shaped the edges were worked sharp by flaking with an implement of bone or horn. The points made of horn or bone were ground sharp by rubbing on a stone. A notch was cut in the end of the narrow shaft, and the shank of the arrow point set in that. The arrowheads were firmly fixed to the shaft by glue and by sinew wrapping. Although the Blackfeet lived almost altogether on the flesh of birds or animals, yet they had some vegetable food. This was chiefly berries, of which in summer the women collected great quantities and dried them for winter use, and roots, the gathering of which at the proper season of the year occupied much of the time of women and young girls. These roots were unearthed by a long, sharp-pointed stick called a root digger. Some of the roots were eaten as soon as collected, while others were dried and stored for use in winter. After they reached the plains, the main food of the Blackfeet was the buffalo, which they killed in large numbers when everything went right. Many of the streams in the Blackfeet country run through wide, deep valleys bordered on either side by cliffs or broken precipices, falling sharply from the high prairie above. Long ago the Blackfeet must have learned that it was possible to make the buffalo jump over these cliffs, and that in the fall on the rocks below numbers would be killed or crippled. No doubt after this had been practised for a time, there came to some one the idea of building at the foot of such a cliff where the buffalo were run over a fence which would form a corral or pound, and which would hold all the buffalo that were jumped over the cliff. This corral they called Miskin. It is often said that the buffalo were driven over these precipices, but this is true only in part. Like most wild animals, buffalo are inquisitive. It was not difficult to excite their curiosity, and when they saw something they did not recognize, they were anxious to find out what it was. When run into the Miskin, the buffalo were really drawn by curiosity almost to the jumping point, and between two long diverging lines of people who kept hidden until after the buffalo had passed them, and then rose and showed themselves and tried to frighten the animals. Now, to be sure, for the short distance that remained between the place where they were alarmed and the place where they jumped, the buffalo were driven. Any attempt on the open prairie to drive buffalo in one direction or another would be certain to fail. The animals would go where they wished to. They would not be driven, though often they might be led. To the people the capture of food was the most important thing in life, and they put forth every effort to accomplish it. For this reason it came about that the effort to capture buffalo was preceded usually by religious ceremonies, in which many prayers were offered to the powers of the earth, the sky, and the waters, many sacrifices made, and sacred objects, like the buffalo stone, were displayed. When the day for the hunt came, the man who was to bring the buffalo left the camp early in the morning, climbed the rocky bluffs to the high prairie, and journeyed towards some nearby herd of buffalo that had been located the day before by himself or by other young men. He approached the buffalo as nearly as he could without frightening them, and then, attracting the attention of some of the animals by uttering certain calls, tossed into the air his buffalo robe or some smaller object. As soon as the buffalo began to look at him, he retreated slowly in the direction of the Miskin, but continued to call and to attract their attention by showing himself and then disappearing. Soon some of the buffalo began to walk toward him, and others began to look and to follow those that had first started, so that before long the whole herd of 50 or 100 animals might be walking or sometimes trotting after him. The more rapidly the buffalo came on, the faster the man ran, and sometimes it was a hard matter for him to keep ahead of the herd, until he had got far within the wings and near to the cliff. If there seemed danger that he would be overtaken, he watched his chance, and either at some low place quickly dodged out of the line in which the buffalo were running, or hid behind one of the piles of stones of which the wings were formed, or, if he had time, slipped over the rocky wall at the valley's edge, so as to get out of the way of the approaching herd. As soon as the buffalo had come well within the diverging lines of people, who were hidden behind the piles of stones called wings, those whom the buffalo passed rose up from their places of concealment, and by yells and shouts and the waving of their robes frightened the buffalo, so that they quite forgot their curiosity in the terror that now replaced it. When the leaders reached the brink of the cliff, they could not stop. They were pushed over by those behind, and most of the buffalo jumped over the cliff. Many were crippled or injured by the fall, and all were kept within the fence of the Miskin below. About this fence the people were collected. The buffalo raced round and round within the pen, the young and weak being injured or killed in the crowding, while above the fence men were shooting them with arrows, until presently all in the pen were dead or so hurt that the women could go into the pen and kill them. The people entered and took the flesh and hides. Deer, elk, and antelope were shot with arrows, and antelope were often captured in pitfalls roofed with slender poles and covered with grass and earth. Such pitfalls were dug in a region where antelope were plenty, and a long-shaped pair of wings, made of poles or brushes, or even rock piles, led to the pit. The antelope is very inquisitive, and was easily led within the chute, and there frightened, as were the buffalo, by people who had been concealed, and who rose up and showed themselves after the antelope had passed. This was done more in order to secure antelope skins for clothing than their flesh for food. Fish and reptiles were not eaten by the Blackfeet, nor were dogs, although dogs, wolves, and coyotes are eaten by many tribes of Plains Indians. Most small animals and practically all birds were eaten in case of need. In summer, when the windfowl which bred on so many of the lakes of the Blackfeet country lost their flight feathers during the moult, and again in the late summer, when the young ducks and geese were almost full grown but could not yet fly, the Indians often went in large parties to the shallow lakes which here and there dotted the prairie, and driving the birds to shore, killed them in large numbers. Earlier in the season, when the fowl had begun to lay their eggs, these were collected in great quantities for food. Sometimes they were roasted in the hot ashes, but a more common way was to dig a deep, narrow hole in the ground in which the eggs were to be cooked. Several little platforms of small sticks or twigs were built in this hole, one above another, and on these platforms they put the eggs. Another much smaller hole was dug to one side of the large hole, slanting down into it. The large hole was partly filled with water, and was then roofed over by small sticks, on which was placed grass covered with earth. Stones were heated in a fire built near at hand, and then were rolled down the side hole into the larger hole, heating the water, which at last boiled and steamed, the steam cooking the eggs. When the Americans first met them on the prairie, the Blackfeet were known as great warriors. But up to the time when they got from the Hudson Bay traders better weapons than they had before known, whether these were metal knives, steel arrow points, or guns, it is probable that they did not do much fighting. There seems to have been no reason why they should have fought, unless they quarreled about small matters with other tribes. It became quite different when the Indians procured better arms, and above all, when they got horses, a means of swiftly getting about over the country, something that all people wanted to have, and which all were so eager to obtain that they would go into danger for them. In the old days of stone arrowheads, when they had to travel on foot and to carry heavy loads on their backs, the whole thought and effort of the tribe must have been devoted to the work of procuring a supply of food. The tribal and family life of the people was simple and friendly. The man and his wives loved each other and loved their children. Relationship counted for much in an Indian camp, and cousins of remote degree were called brother and sister. Children were not punished. They were trained by persuasion and advice. They were told by older people how they ought to act in order to make their lives happy and successful, and to be well thought of by their fellows. Young people had much respect for their elders, listened to what they said, and strove more or less successfully to follow their teachings. The Blackfeet were very religious. They feared many natural powers and influences whose workings they did not understand, and they were constantly praying to the sun, regarded as the ruler of the universe, as well as to those other powers which they believe live in the stars, the earth, the mountains, the animals, and the trees. The Blackfoot was constantly afraid that some evil thing might happen to him, and he therefore prayed to all the powers for help, for good fortune in his undertakings, for health, plenty, and long life for himself and all his family. Among these tribes there are a number of secret societies known as the All Comrades or All Friends, groups of men of different ages which have been alluded to in the stories. Originally there were about 12 of these societies, but a number have been abandoned of recent years. The tribe was divided into a number of clans, all the members of which were believed to be related, and in old times no member of a clan was permitted to marry another member of the clan. Relations might not marry. In olden times, when large numbers of people were together, the lodges of the camp were pitched in a great circle, the opening toward the southeast. In this circle each clan camped in its own particular place, with relation to the other clans. Within the circle was often a smaller circle of lodges, each occupied by one or more of the societies of the All Comrades. Sometimes it happened that great numbers of the Blackfeet came together, perhaps even all the three tribes, Blackfeet, Bloods, and Pagans. When this was the case, each tribe camped by itself with its own circle, no matter how near it might be to one or other of the tribal circles. We read of some tribes of Indians which believed that after death the spirits of the departed went to a happy hunting ground, where game was always plenty and life was full of joy. The Blackfeet knew no such place as this. When they died, their spirits were believed to go to a barren, sandy region south of the Saskatchewan, which they called the Sand Hills. Here, as shadows, the ghosts lived a life much like their existence before death, but all was unreal, unsubstantial. Riding on shadow horses, they hunted shadow buffalo. They lived in shadow camps, and when they moved, shadow dogs hauled their travois. There are stories which tell that living people have seen these hunters, their houses, and their implements of the camp. But when the people got close, they found that what they thought they had seen was something different. It reminds us a little of the old ballad of Alice Brand, where Urgan tells of the things seen in fairyland. And gaily shines the fairyland, but all is glistening show, like the idle gleam that December's beam can dart on ice and snow. And fading like that varied gleam is our inconstant shape, who now like knight and lady seem, and now like dwarf and ape. Books have been written about the Blackfeet Indian, which tell much more about how they lived than can be given here. End of chapter 25. End of Blackfeet Indian Stories by George B. Grinnell.